So we all have our cell phones and we're all obsessed with them. But what if you could make the world a little bit better every time you look down at your iPhone or Android? Well, luckily with Credo Mobile, you actually can. It's the only progressive phone company. They give millions of dollars every year to nonprofits like Planned Parenthood and the ACLU, if you're of that political persuasion. They've been Planned Parenthood's largest corporate donor for years. Not to mention, coverage is dependable. You can keep your existing number when you switch over. It's a better world for all of us and a better way to stay connected in it. So if you agree with them, give Credo Mobile a shot. Go to credomobile.com/Katie Couric or call 888-331-1685 to switch today.
Hi, everyone. For our returning listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. I think you're really going to like the show today. Now, for those of you who are new to the show, welcome to my Pod Squad. If you came here because the Pod Save America guys recommended us, the conversation is going to sound very familiar because you've probably already heard it. It's my interview with Jon Favreau, Jon Lovett, and Tommy Vitor from Crooked Media. But since you like that podcast, I thought I'd recommend a couple of my favorite episodes of this podcast. A great place to start is our conversation with Alec Baldwin. It was, I think, the only time he's done his Trump impression outside of SNL. Not only did Alec crack us up, he also made us think, because this is a guy with a fascinating story and strong opinions, and as the president might say, a really good brain. Another episode I really liked is with a man named Bill Browder. Now, you may not have heard of him, but his life has really been right out of a spy novel. He was once the biggest foreign investor in Russia until he was kicked out of the country, and then his young lawyer was killed. He has a fascinating, scary perspective on Vladimir Putin and the new Russia. And coming soon, I'm really excited about this. My co-host Brian Goldsmith and I will be interviewing Tony Robbins, the great entrepreneur and leadership coach to CEOs and presidents. I can't wait for his perspective on Donald Trump's particular style of leadership. So to all the newbies, please let us know what you think. Just email us at comments@curricpodcast.com or leave us a voicemail. We love getting those at 929-224-4637. You can also reach out to me on social media. I'm at Katie Couric on Twitter and Instagram, and Katie.Couric on Snapchat. Phew, lots of social media platforms to keep up with. Anyway, without further delay, here's our show, and thank you for listening. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Katie.
Well, as you know, because you're a real student of podcasts, Brian, Pod Save America is one of the hottest political podcasts in the country right now. It's basically four white dudes sitting around talking about the state of the country and bitching about Donald Trump. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's pretty fair. And they would also add that they're trying to figure out how to harness all this progressive anti-Trump energy in a constructive direction.
And they know politics like the back of their hands. I mean, these guys have a lot of experience because they're all alumni of the Obama administration, correct?
That's right. The three guys you spoke to all worked in the Obama White House. Jon Favreau was President Obama's head speechwriter at a very young age. Tommy Vitor was President Obama's national security spokesman. And Jon Lovett is kind of the funny guy. He helped Obama with the White House Correspondents' Dinners, and he also previously worked as a speechwriter for Hillary Clinton. So they're not just commenting on politics. They really know it.
And Dan Pfeiffer sometimes participates as well. He was the White House Communications Director and Senior Advisor for Strategy and Communications. Wow, how'd he fit that on his business card in the Obama administration? And Jon Lovett, by the way, is not the Jon Lovett you might remember if you're a certain age, the one who said, yeah, that's the ticket on Saturday Night Live.
And Jon Favreau is not the director of Iron Man either, or the star of Chef. It's a different Jon Favreau.
Anyway, they're a lot of fun. They have a lot to say, and they're really trying to, as you said, harness the energy that has surfaced in the wake of the Donald Trump presidency. And we had a very fun conversation about a lot of things. I quickly took over as the interviewer. It didn't take long because they said, "Don't you want to ask us any questions?" I think they got tired of me or bored with me pretty early on.
I don't think so. I think everybody's just comfortable with you asking questions because you have a little more experience than they do.
Anyway, well, unfortunately, because of challenging technical issues, Brian, you couldn't participate in this conversation. I know you were listening, however, and we're going to be talking about it on the other side and pick apart some of the things that the hosts of this podcast had to say. So enough preamble. Let's get to my conversation with the hosts of Pod Save America. Jon Favreau, Tommy Vitor, and John Lovett. And Dan Pfeiffer's here, isn't he?
No, Dan's not here.
We left him
sorry.
behind.
Let me do that again. Okay.
I think we should leave this in.
Where the hell is Dan?
Who cares? Dan, I love you. Just kidding. Just kidding.
So you guys want to go first?
Sure. So we'll start with Trump's burgeoning relationship with the news media. Last week, the big news was Trump tweeting, "The fake news media is not my enemy. It is the enemy of the American people." My question to you is, how dangerous do you think it is for Trump to cast the media as the enemy of the American people? Or do you think it's dangerous?
I thought you were going to say, how dangerous are you, Katie Couric?
I'm very
that's the
dangerous.
first question.
In fact,
Yeah.
my nickname is Katie Danger. No, I think it is incredibly dangerous. I think we've seen him go down this road, but I think it was brought to a new level with that recent tweet. It's gotten sort of progressively worse in terms of his relationship with the press. Clearly, he's trying to delegitimize the press, just as he's trying to delegitimize the judiciary and the entire electoral process, these democratic institutions, because it gives him more credibility. It makes it harder for people to take criticism of his policies or what he's doing seriously, or at least a certain portion of the population. So I find it really depressing, dispiriting, and I think the press is still trying to figure out, the media writ large, how to handle. And when you talk about the media writ large, of course, you're talking about very bifurcated media organizations, because you have the conservative press on one side and a more progressive press. And, I think there are fewer and fewer that can be considered sort of straddling both worlds. So I think people are scratching their heads saying, how do we deal with this as news organizations? How do we regain the trust, if you will? Because one thing he said that was accurate in his press conference is the approval rating for the media is lower than the approval rating for Congress. And I think, how do you handle a problem like Donald Trump, to quote the Sound of Music instead of Maria von Trapp or whatever? So I think, I don't know what the solution is. I think that the media has to resist getting sucked into these personal battles and has to try as much as it can to really focus on the policy positions he's taken and some of the things that he needs to be held accountable for, the relationship with Russia and what that means, and get to the bottom of that. I don't think investigative reporting has ever been so important as it is now. And I think that, they need to spend less time focused on his tweets and his style and more time focused on the substance of his policies. What do you guys think?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think you see this sort of challenge, which is when Trump says something like, the media is the enemy. I mean, there's nothing that a lot of the press corps likes to do more than kind of navel gaze and discuss their own relevance and role.
Right.
But yet, at the same time, it is important to figure out what you do and how you cover a president who says these things about the press. So I guess the question would be, how do you respond and hold the line against a president who declares the media the enemy, while at the same time not letting it distract from the importance of that kind of investigative role, policy role, substantive role?
Well, I think, and I also, I was thinking it's a great time to do a documentary on the role of the media in a democracy, and go to a country where there isn't a free press and what that's like, and remind people of some of the basic principles that this country was founded on. And I think, to your point, too much navel gazing starts to feel like too much navel gazing. So how do you also deal with all this fake news? During the campaign, I had very well-educated friends sending me articles saying, "Did you see this?" And I would be like, "Where did you see that? This is complete bullshit." And my friends would be like, "Oh, it's all over the internet." So
Right.
I think that the technology has moved faster than sort of our ability to consume it with some kind of discernment. And I think, maybe news organizations need to get together so that consumers can know what a legitimate news organization is that adheres to certain principles and practices, almost like a good housekeeping seal of approval. So when they read something, they can appreciate and understand that this has been, double sourced, that it's been edited. Now, of course, the problem is fewer and fewer outlets do that now because of the demand for speed is superseded the demand for accuracy. So, I think there are all sorts of issues entailed in this conversation.
Yeah, and another complicating factor is the blurring line between fake news and partisan media, because you have, the former CEO of Breitbart sitting in the most powerful office in the White House right now, and they're sort of his hand-picked go-to news outlet who, they had the only seat reserved in the front row at the first press conference. So I'm wondering, how can a press corps work with a White House when they're going to their favorite news sources and there's this clear partisan slant of the press corps that's growing? It's not getting more objective. I think it's getting actively less objective through these Skype interviews and the other things they're doing.
No, I agree. And I think that the media just has to continue to stay on top of these stories. I think part of the problem is that there was always this fine line between access and accountability. You do a tough interview with a political leader, a president, a cabinet member, and this happened to me in my career, and then you get blackballed by that White House because they don't like the hard questions you ask. They didn't like your quote-unquote tone. And that happened to me several times in the past. And I think these networks still, it's this kind of struggle because they want the ratings that would come with an interview with a high-ranking official or even the president. But the minute that you really come down on that president, which is hard to imagine not doing in the current administration, you will never have access again. So I think people need to realize these news outlets that they're probably going to have to give up access, because already I think the administration recognizes publications and networks and whatever who are going to be predisposed to be easier on administration officials.
Right. I'm wondering what you think of, there's this half hour in the morning, network news shows that is hard news. And I feel like at a certain points of time that half hour has been longer. It's been 45 minutes or an hour. If you watch CBS this morning, it's a little longer. I'm wondering what your take is on sort of watching that block shrink over time, or the sort of sensational or commercialization of tabloidization of some of these morning news programs.
Look at Tommy asking, it's interesting.
Well, I think about that a lot. Because it has shrunk significantly. And I think, the time that is allotted to really serious, important issues has gotten less and less. I think part of it is, with a shrinking audience, you need to appeal to a mass audience. So there's fear, I think, that you're going to turn people off by doing too much hard news. I think Good Morning America started sort of being lighter, and then I think the Today Show sort of followed suit. I think the Today Show has self-corrected to a certain degree. But, it's tricky, isn't it? Because, it's sort of some of the same things that these companies are dealing with, whether it's Under Armour, LL Bean, or Nordstrom's. Once you get politicized at all, you turn off a segment of the population, right? And it's tricky, I think. But if I were, in charge, I would certainly devote more time to big issues. And they don't, it doesn't have to all be politics. It could be explaining NAFTA and talking about the controversy of the wall. I went to a dinner this weekend, and the Mexican ambassador to the UN was kind of talking to us about the wall and how humiliating that was for Mexicans, and about the fact that many fewer Mexicans are coming to the United States because of NAFTA, because it has been so important to the Mexican economy that many people are staying in Mexico where they can find good jobs. Things like that, I think that we get so sort of caught up in the superficialities of who did what, who said what, the outrageous behavior, the crazy tweet, that we don't really dig into these issues that I think educate and help illuminate some of the big, big policy challenges that we're facing in this country. Whether or not they would, abandon a morning show in droves if that kind of thing happened, I'm not sure. But I would like to see much more of it, frankly.
Do you have a question for us?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
We just took like the first
Well, guys,
five.
I have so many questions for you guys. First of all,
Awesome.
I know that part of your mission in doing Pod Save America and Crooked Media is to encourage activism. And I'm curious, I read a piece in the Times this weekend that said, as liberals and progressives become more politically active and kind of stand up against some of the policies that are being enacted by this administration, moderate Republicans are being pushed closer to Trump because, again, this divide is so intense and the rhetoric is so harsh on both sides. And I'm curious, do you think we're forever going to be a polarized nation, a polarized media? Is there any way to cross this divide at all? John, I'll ask you first, and I'd love for the other guys to weigh in.
Yeah, we were just talking about that article. We're not fans.
I'm being very restrained, but I hate that article with the fire of 1,000 suns.
Really? Okay, good. Tell me why.
And not because the question you're asking isn't important, right? Like, I think the question about this polarization is really important, but that article was a bunch of garbage because it conflates a bunch of different things. Like, is activism, protest, and Hollywood liberals, are they alienating Trump voters? By the way, first of all, I can't. The article was so outrageous because it asked these Trump people, like, you know what? I used to like Meryl Streep, and now I don't even know if I can go to the movies. Shut up. Give me a break. and then also this guy being like, I might have supported a Democrat, but then I saw a mean tweet about Donald Trump, and now I don't know what to think anymore. I think there's a lot. I think that sometimes you see these that first of all, I think that there are people who answer these questions in a way that they think pundits want them to answer them, and they're not speaking to their actual feelings about like what the actual way in which they make decisions about politics are. They're asked a question, are liberals alienating you? And then the answer is very easy to say yes. I don't know. I'm rambling.
What about the Pew poll that showed 70% of moderate Republicans think Donald Trump is doing a good job? Were you surprised by that?
Well, so I wasn't, because since they may call themselves moderate Republicans, but they ID as Republicans, and so if your party ID carries more of a weight than whether you identify as moderate, liberal, or conservative, right? So in that same poll, independents gave him a 35% approval rating and a 59% disapproval rating, right? So they shaded it to fit the narrative of the story. The other thing is, the three people that they interviewed for that story, one of them had been in the New York Times before, interviewed by the same reporter wearing a Make America Great Again hat. And then one of them said that, said that she was more scared of Democrats than Islamic terrorists. So these are not like persuadable Republicans, right?
She has a point.
No, but to your larger point, the question about polarization is a good one and a right one. I think what that article does is it sort of conflates this is what a lot of analysis has been doing these days, Trump fans with Trump voters. And I think those two groups are different, right? The Trump fans, which I think they interviewed a few Trump fans in that piece and not just Trump voters, reluctant Trump voters, they are getting their news from Fox and Breitbart and all these very conservative media sources and sometimes fake news sources, and trying to pierce their bubble, right? And trying to persuade them why Trump isn't good for the country, or Trump is lying, or Trump is doing X. I think that is extraordinarily difficult, and that is a huge problem that we have to deal with. And I'm not sure how we deal with that, because it's hard to reach people like that who are getting all this news like that.
We're going to take a quick break to hear some messages from our sponsors and to ask for some messages from you. We'll be right back with more from the Pod Save America team.
Support for this podcast comes from Toyota and their new 2017 Highlander. If you're like me, when the weekend comes, you don't just want to sit around the house with your screaming baby. You want to actually get out with the family, explore new places and try new things. Maybe check out a museum, hit a festival, or head out into nature. The new Toyota Highlander is the perfect vehicle for discovery. It starts on the outside with sleek design and an aggressive new front grille.
That sounds very sexy when you say that. Sleek design and aggressive new front grille.
Yeah, I'm always sexy. And its improved powertrain makes it more fun to drive and more fuel efficient than ever. It has Toyota's Safety Sense technology standard, including a pre-collision system and a lane departure alert. It even has 5 USB charging ports because you know the last thing you want is for someone's device to run out of power. One of your favorite features is Driver Easy Speak, which lets you broadcast what you say to the rear seat so your passengers can hear you. You can not just scream at your children, but you could scream at your children into a microphone. It doesn't mean they'll listen, but at least they can really hear you. So navigate to your nearest Toyota dealer or Toyota.com and see why there's always more to discover in the new 2017 Highlander. Drivers are responsible for their own safe driving. Always pay attention to your surroundings and drive safely. Depending on the condition of roads, weather, and the vehicle, the systems may not work as intended. See owner's manual for additional limitations and details. The TSS pre-collision system is not a substitute for safe driving and attentive driving practices. Lane departure alert is not a substitute for safe and attentive driving practices. Wow. Do I get paid extra for that?
Brian. Nobody would ever know that you haven't slept in 2 days because your baby is not sleeping. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. So the year is already flying by, and I'm sure everyone's calendars are filling up fast. But before you commit too much of your time to meetings, appointments, obligations, remember to save some time for a vacation with Princess Cruise Lines.
You know, Brian, new research by teams from University of California, Berkeley and UC Irvine has shown that experiencing feelings of awe, like I feel every time I do this podcast with you, Brian, might make you more generous and caring. But that's absolutely true. So whether you're dreaming of climbing the majestic ruins of Machu Picchu or walking along the cherry blossoms of Tokyo, immersing yourself in a new and wondrous environment could also actually make you a better, nicer person.
So what are all of you waiting for? Plan a trip with Princess Cruise Lines today. And now, during the Princess Cruise Anniversary Sale, you can get up to $600 in free onboard spending money that you can use to sip wines you can't pronounce, go cage diving, or my favorite, unwind at the Lotus Spa.
Actually, I think you've been spotted repeatedly at the Lotus Spa, Brian.
Yeah, I like the Lotus Spa. There's never been a better time to take your next vacation on a Princess Cruise. So visit princess.com/Katie for more details. Again, that's princess.com/Katie.
Are you calling me a princess?
Maybe a little bit. For our next podcast, we're going to be talking with Tony Robbins. You may know him as a motivational speaker and infomercial star, but he's also a hugely successful entrepreneur, business strategist, advisor to presidents and CEOs, best-selling author. So what questions do you have for Tony? Call us at 929-224-4637. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
What is Crooked Media? What is your goal? Is it sort of a Fox News on the left?
It's not. I mean, it's weird because I don't want to say that it's Fox News on the left, but I think it is a we want to be a progressive media company that sort of inspires activism, right? And so I think that there's a younger generation out there right now, and there is a gap between their enthusiasm and their engagement. So you have a lot of young people who are really they want to do something, they want to get involved, but they don't know how, and they haven't been involved in politics before. And we want to sort of bring those people.
Maybe tell them to vote.
That's the start. That's the start.
And one big difference too is that I think we're trying our best to kind of have an honest conversation. And look, we have a very strong point of view. You know, we obviously we are Democrats, but you know, we're trying to do our best to say what we think, how we feel, being honest about that. And I don't think that's true of Fox.
Just getting back to your initial question, I mean, I think there's certainly the case during the election that there was a lot of people, this show included, where the tone was, Donald Trump is an idiot. If you vote for Donald Trump, you're an idiot. Yeah. And that came through loud and clear to a lot of people. We've done a lot of soul searching on that, and I think that was unhelpful to say the least. I think it's your God-given right as an American citizen to say whatever the hell you want about any elected official in the language that you feel is most appropriate. That said, I don't think we're going to persuade people unless we're being a little more thoughtful about how we talk about him sometimes.
I think this is true for liberals, and I think it's true for politicians too. It's never a good idea to play sociologist when you're talking about voters, right? Because when you talk about like people feeling this divide or feeling that they're like put upon by, you know, Clinton supporters or the elites or stuff like that, it's people, we often talk about people like they're this like, we're like anthropologists studying an ancient culture. Like,
we're like,
what do the white working class voters think?
Like
Where
Sir
do they
Richard
go
Attenborough with a pair of binoculars.
And like, look, and politicians have done that for, like, Obama has done that a few times when he did the guns and religions comment. Like, Hillary Clinton did that with deplorables. Like, it is never a good idea to talk about voters. Right?
Well, isn't that part of the problem, you guys? Well, I interviewed Doris Kearns Goodwin after the election and on this podcast, and she basically said it, and I think Brian Stevenson talks about this a lot as well, being proximate. And part of it is geographical. I mean, that we have these rural and exurban voters oftentimes. And people in these big cities, coastal cities, have very little interaction with people. I was having dinner with my husband on Friday night, and we were sitting next to a very nice couple from Memphis. And they recognized me despite the fact I had no makeup on and it looked really scary. And so we started chatting. And this guy, we were talking about Trump, of course, because you can't go anywhere without, you know, there's no place that is safe. There's no Trump-free zone these days. And he basically said, you know, I voted for Trump, and I was screaming at him on the television saying, please shut up. And I said, but do you still support him? He said, yeah. He said, I have a family furniture business. The Asians are killing American manufacturing when it comes to furniture. The time it takes to build a new factory in this country is crazy. There are too many regulations. We want the best for our employees. And we really hope that he's going to be more hospitable to small businesses. And, you know, my husband, who's in finance, basically says, you know, Donald Trump could do a lot that's good for the economy. Would you concede that there are some positive things that he could do and maybe some corrections from overregulation that might have been put in place during the Obama administration?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of positive things he could do. I mean, look, what's interesting about that conversation with the guy is that I think where we should be opposing Donald Trump or debating Donald Trump is on those issues, right? Because I could make a case that Obama's policies or liberal democratic policies would do a better job of helping small businesses and bringing manufacturing back or educating people for the next generation of high-tech manufacturing, right? And so I think getting back to those, I think those arguments are probably the best way to actually persuade people and not, oh my God, did you see his tweet? He's awful and terrible and that's it. Because I think the bigger gap the bigger bubble here is between people who are super engaged with the media and consume media every day, every minute of the day. And that goes for people on the left and people on the right. And then many, many more Americans who are just very casual observers of the media and casual consumers of the media. And they are not paying as close attention to a lot of these debates as we are. And therefore, when they aren't as outraged about everything as Donald Trump does as we are, we're often like, well, aren't you paying attention? And it's like, well, no, people are busy. They're leading busy lives and they don't want to spend every 5 seconds trying to like correct Donald Trump's lies.
And aren't a lot of these arguments or discussions very nuanced and complicated? You know, not everybody is reading The Economist, where the whole issue was on globalization or automation. And, you know, I think one of the problems, and you all can certainly respond to this, is I think President Obama had a hard time communicating in simple terms what his policies would do. And you've heard this before. He was often sort of professorial and almost too sophisticated in the way he expressed himself. And I think, of course, you have the polar opposite in Donald Trump, you know, in terms of how simplistic he is in explaining his positions. So how do you get even those two arguments out there and discussed in an intelligent way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two pieces to that. There's communicating the policies, and then there's whether or not these policies, this consensus around economic policy has been accepted. Because what's interesting about what you're saying about this person you met at the restaurant is actually, you know, Tommy and Johnny roll their eyes, but it's actually similar to the kind of thing my dad says, who had a factory, and no, there. See, there.
I didn't roll your eyes at your dad. I like.
Well,
I'm more mad that you accuse me of rolling my eyes.
That I say this
the
a
eyes
lot.
have been sitting right here, looking straight ahead.
Katie, I want you to know they've been great, and I was wrong. But what I was going to say is that I feel like there's been this, especially, Trump's actually adopted some of this Paul Ryan language around taxes and regulation. And there has been a really big divisive debate in Washington for a long time on taxes and regulation. But what Trump came in on was actually kind of breaking up a consensus around things like immigration and trade that it turns out were incredibly resonant issues with people. And I think if there's one good thing that's coming out of what Trump is doing is, first of all, I think he's, turning over a bunch of dogmas on the right, but also I think he's forcing Democrats to confront a lot of these policies, which, I think Barack Obama, Democrats generally have talked a lot about a communications failure, and I think that's true. But I think what the Bernie Sanders rise, what Trump's rise is showing is there's actually bigger policy questions that we maybe need to answer in a different way.
What are the Democrats going to do to get their mojo back, guys?
I mean, I think it's going to start. I think it has to start from the grassroots. I think it's starting in a lot of these protests. I think it's starting with a lot of these town halls. Like, I do not think it starts in Washington with a lot of the leaders we have there. I think already a lot of the Democrats in Washington are playing catch up to what's going on around the country. I think that's a good thing, because I think if we're going to reinvent the party, reinventing it from outside of Washington is better than doing it from inside Washington.
And also, that's actually, I think, ultimately what bothered me about that article you referenced, to bring it back, which is, look, Hollywood people, sounding off about love Trump's hate, like, I think that can be useless. But to conflate that with an incredibly exciting and inspiring moment of activism and protest and people going town halls, I think that's wrong, and I think that's too broad a brush, not a precise enough tool, because I think that this activism, whether or not there are some protesters who go too far and say things that maybe bother some people, on the whole has been one of the only things that has successfully taken the microphone away from Donald Trump.
It is funny. You have, like, on the national level, you have Democrats with, like, simplistic slogans like "Love Trump's hate," and then at these town halls, you have average voters with an incredibly sophisticated understanding of the Affordable Care Act, asking their congressmen questions about lifetime limits and caps and stuff like that. And it's really inspiring to see that. And it's also a lesson that, people know a lot more than just the people are more than the simplistic slogans that we.
I remember watching those town halls after that summer when President Obama first introduced the Affordable Care Act. And, I think it was a very organized effort to protest this program. Remember? And people would be like, on page 38, paragraph 2, you state. So I think that our people at those town halls following that model that we saw early on in the Obama presidency, you think?
So far, yeah. I mean, so far it looks like there's a very active, very well organized, very well educated, respectful campaign to go to these town halls, to demand that members of Congress hold them, and to ask them very specific questions, both about the Affordable Care Act, but also sort of the Russia scandal and other things going on. So it seems like that playbook is being followed, although I do think these town halls have gotten shy of being quite as intense or caustic as maybe the Tea Party ones were back in the day, but that was because those people legitimately thought that there were going to be death panels and things that were lies.
Well, I remember watching those and thinking how woefully uneducated the members of Congress were when they faced their constituents. It was shocking to me. Shocking. Was it to you?
No. Look, I used to say, approval rating of Congress amongst the American people is somewhere around 10%. Approval rating of Congress among people who have worked at Congress is about 0%. We know these people, and it's the worst the closer you get.
Oh,
some of them are great.
That's lovely. That's so depressing. But okay. So we have the educated people at town hall meetings. You have people protesting. So what is this realistically going to accomplish? I read David Brooks a couple of days ago, and he said basically there's nothing that really can be done for the next 4 years. I mean, what do you think? What is the road forward in your view for people who oppose Donald Trump? The midterms don't look super promising.
No, I think that the midterms do. I think there's Democrats need 24 seats to take the House back. I think there were something like 30 seats where Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump in a district where a Republican is sitting in the district right now. So I think that's the first target. And
but the Senate looks pretty dubious.
Senate's tough.
Senate's tough. I don't think we can win the Senate back because I think you can pick off at best you could pick off Dean Heller in Nevada and Jeff Flake in Arizona at best, and then you're basically got a tied Senate at that point.
And we have a lot of Democrats to defend,
seems like the best case scenario is a tied Senate, and then the Democrats taking the House back. But if the Democrats take the House back, then they have subpoena power, then they can investigate, then they can legislatively stop a lot of Donald Trump's domestic policies. So it would be huge.
And when I say hold Trump accountable, I mean impeachment, but I don't say it.
Well, let's go there.
I mean, I think you can. I don't think it's a good idea to like throw around the word impeachment unless there's an impeachable offense that
there are.
Well, are there?
I don't know that we know yet, but I do think no one should discount how unbelievably distracting these ongoing investigations are going to be. I mean, depending on who you read, there are multiple FBI investigations going on a variety of Trump associates or aides or what have you. And this White House is going to be more bogged down than they could ever possibly imagine. And it's just begun.
And possibly for good reason. I mean, it might not just be a distraction.
Right.
Very seemingly for good reason.
In all seriousness, I think holding them accountable means investigating, means actual hearings, means doing the job that people like Jason Chaffetz and Paul Ryan refuse to do. Whether or not there's grounds for removing Donald Trump, I don't think we can say yet.
Well, what do you think the Democrats should do in Congress, the people you hold in such high regard? Should they do what to Trump, what the GOP did to Barack Obama?
I mean, I think they should oppose every policy they disagree with, which seems to be many. I mean, I don't think he has put if the Paul Ryan repeal and replace plan, which basically just like takes Medicaid and healthcare subsidies away from millions of people, is the plan, then absolutely they should oppose it. I think that every time a plan comes up or a proposal or a policy comes up, Democrats should decide, would you support it on the merits, right?
But
it doesn't seem.
Should they pick their battles? In other words, I mean, should they put up a fight against Neil Gorsuch? Because if they really do that, it's going to pretty much hand Donald Trump a big fat victory, is it not?
I think he's going to get Gorsuch on regardless.
Yeah.
Because he's got the votes. But I do think, I think hearings are important for Gorsuch, which is what Merrick Garland didn't get. And I think let's hear him out. Let's ask him really tough questions. And if it seems like he's a judge that's not in the mainstream, which we believe Merrick Garland was, then vote against him. Also, and if you do think he's in the mainstream, then vote for him.
In the mainstream. I mean, like that's whether or not Democrats should vote to confirm him it will really ultimately have nothing to do with whether or not he's in the mainstream. They've already made up their minds, and it's totally a political decision. The thing I would say about that political decision that's important to me is we need to give people a reason to vote for Democrats. And there's a lot of people out there that want to see that Democrats are fighting. And the fact that Gorsuch will get on no matter what is almost beside the point. Like, showing that we're willing to fight is going to get people excited about sending more Democrats to the House and to the Senate.
Let's talk about Hillary Clinton, if we could. John, I'm just curious. I heard so many people say if the Hillary we saw in the concession speech would have surfaced more during the course of the campaign, it might have turned out differently. Does that gall you when people make that observation?
What do you think, Lovett?
I think
Since
people have
you
been
wrote
saying that if only the Hillary that showed up after she lost were around, she would have won. They said that after her 2008 defeat. I think they said that again this time. I think that there is some truth to it. I think that there's some truth to the fact that there's some kind of a political instinct that she has and that the people around her have over the years that has nothing to do with an individual team, because it repeats over and over again, that there's a kind of control that ultimately is self-defeating. And I think that's absolutely true.
So is that what happened? Do you think that's what went wrong? She was too cautious and controlling? Or the campaign itself, that sort of that sounded over personalized, but that the sort of ethos of the campaign was too cautious and controlling.
Look, you mentioned that about the concession speech. People have said that about John Kerry after his concession speech. They said it about Mitt Romney after his concession speech. They said it about Al Gore after his concession speech.
They said it about John McCain.
They said about John McCain. There are a certain brand of politicians who are too cautious during a campaign, and it is not are less cautious after the campaign's over. And that is because they run with an overwhelming fear of losing, and that fear of losing makes them more cautious and calculated sometimes. When that's not who they are.
My sister was running for lieutenant governor of Virginia with Mark Warner when she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and she was a real rising star in the Democratic Party, and a lot of people said she was going to be the first female governor, and unfortunately, tragically, she passed away. But she told me when she was running for state senate, et cetera, she said, when you run for office, you have to be willing to lose. And I think what she meant is, it sounds so simple, is that you have to be true to yourself and to your core values and principles and let the chips fall where they may.
It's absolutely right. It does sound simple, but it is incredibly hard, and a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just this people. It's like there's so many advisors and there's so many polls, and but ultimately people don't make a decision based on like how you met 10 different metrics. You have to get them to vote for you. You as a person have to get someone else to vote for you. And look, I think ultimately it's actually probably not that helpful to worry about what Hillary Clinton's individual liabilities were when we need to figure out who the next person is and how they're going to win. And the truth is, everything mattered in this campaign. We lost by 100,000 votes across 3 states. Comey mattered, the email mattered, the hacks mattered, the leaks everything mattered. Well,
what about a coherent message to blue collar Democrats? I know you all have said that there was that message, but somehow it just didn't come through. And saying go to my website just doesn't cut it, fellas.
No, we agree. I think that's fair, and I do think that it's worth examining this campaign because, I don't want us to overlearn problems that may or may not have been specific to Hillary Clinton and her campaign and apply them too broadly to Democrats and overthink sort of needing to segment the population of the United States and reach out to X, Y, or Z voter. That said, I think the bigger problem we all made was the lesson of Bernie Sanders and of Donald Trump was that every voters across the country were screaming, we are sick and tired of Washington. And then we handed them someone that they've been seeing in Washington for 30 years as a nominee. And that was just summarily rejected on a million questions that are probably values-based.
Do you think Bernie Sanders would have beaten Donald Trump?
We talk about this a lot.
It's the look.
Listen to these dodges, artful
no,
dodges.
I'll say yes.
Yes.
My position is yes. My position is Bernie would have won.
I say yes, but I hate counterfactuals because it's so like evidence free for saying
right.
But I have this feeling now that he would have.
Yeah, and look, we've talked about this before. And this actually goes back again to that article. Like, liberals aren't helping Trump, but liberals do need to think very carefully about the language we use and the way we talk to people that are really suffering. And I think that was a failure, not of the Hillary Clinton campaign, but of Democratic politics generally.
But I think you risk it at perpetuating that, because I think there's something patronizing and dismissive about some of the approaches that are being taken by progressives in fighting Donald Trump that you have to be aware of and just in some ways stay away from, where it's almost class warfare, I think, that we're seeing. Do you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we sell patronizing and dismissive by the pound here on Pod Save America.
Part of our brand.
Proudly, apparently.
Look, you're absolutely right. A good message is inclusive and disciplined and proactive and positive and focused on the future. And it's a lot easier and more fun to criticize the dust above the day.
Also, we've noticed like small things. We've talked about this where Democrats often say, the working class feels left behind by the last 20 years of inequality and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, they don't feel left behind. They have been left behind,
right.
But it's like, it's little comments like that are more, like I said, it's analyzing people as opposed to advocating for people.
Sort of that anthropological approach you referred to earlier.
And I think one thing Bernie Sanders does really well is he advocates for people in a real simple way. And it's not quite, and it's ideology aside here, right? Yeah. It is speaking to people's real frustrations and anxieties.
And it's also, by the way, it's not being too smart for our own good. Complicated policies that we're trying to sell. People want good healthcare. They want simple, elegant solutions to problems that they can understand. And I think a lot of sort of democratic insidery, the conversation got very complicated. It got very much like a
policy paper, like a white paper.
Yes, I remember, there was all that talk during the campaign, like, we've got so many more pages of white papers than that dumb guy Donald Trump. It's like, if I ever hear anyone brag about the length of a white paper again, I'm going to lose it.
One thing that you mentioned earlier that people did call Obama aloof or professorial and all these things. The one thing that I always noticed about him, because I spent a year with him in Iowa watching him at literally in backyards, and every Iowa cliche you can imagine I will spout. But the thing that was true about him and about the First Lady was that it was more recent that they were paying off student loans than that they had become famous politicians. And like that reality allowed them to connect with people in a way that was authentic.
Right.
And that is perishable, right? Because you spend long enough in Washington being told you're great and everything is brilliant and things get paid for by so-and-so at Bistro B or wherever you're going for lunch. Like you get lost.
Great steak frites there.
What about so what happens when Donald Trump doesn't, or do you think he will bring manufacturing back? I mean, first of all, only 13% of the jobs lost in manufacturing between 2000 and 2010 were lost to trade. The rest were lost to automation. I read an interesting piece today that said Bill Gates wants to start taxing companies to slow, for their use of robotics to sort of slow the progression, this transformation we're witnessing from an industrial to a technological society. I mean, A, do you think he's going to bring manufacturing back? And B, what happens if he doesn't? Go.
Yeah, I mean, look, the most frustrating part of Donald Trump's, vision that he's selling people is that it's largely fiction, right? Is that most manufacturing jobs aren't coming back, right? That's something that, Bill Clinton was saying back in 1992 when he was running for president. He was honest with people about that. Barack Obama used to be honest with people about that. Now, there are companies that are, we saw this over the last 8 years. There's a trend towards insourcing where a lot of these companies are moving production back to America. So that's good, but it's still a tiny, like you said, is a tiny fraction of the jobs that we've lost. The largest challenge we have as a country that we have to talk about is, and Obama was telling us this when he was on the podcast too, is automation, right? Like,
but
what are we
why
going to
didn't
do?
anybody talk about that during the campaign? It infuriated me.
Well, one, they should have. Two, it's a complicated issue that
I don't think anybody knows the answer. That's why I think they didn't talk about it.
That is huge.
I think no one knowing the answer where the next generation of jobs is going to come from is left an opening for someone like Trump and other
to lie about it.
Yeah, I mean, look,
that's right.
If the solutions of the center left and the center right are not going to answer the problems of regular people, it's going to open the door to monsters.
And it has.
I would just say we all should be rooting for Donald Trump's success because this is the biggest challenge we're going to face. It's going to get worse. It's going to get harder. I hope to God he can figure out a way to bring back jobs.
Are you really rooting for Donald Trump's success?
I am. On a policy level, but the reason I don't have a lot of
manufacturing.
The reason I don't have any, but the reason I don't have a lot of hope that he's really going to work on this and make progress is that he filed for re-election 5 hours after he was sworn in, and this weekend he held a campaign rally. And the guy loves the crowds and the big promises and the bluster and bravado, and we have not seen him spend a lot of time at the White House getting to work doing stuff. And yes, he can make press releases and repackage announcements from companies that had already pledged to create some sort of jobs here in the United States. But like, it's governing by press release. There's not a dedicated, thoughtful process in place to actually fix it.
And even that is kind of a Band-Aid, although he is very good at making hay over small accomplishments like the carrier jobs, right?
Great at that. And that was actually an incredibly effective part of his pitch. So he's got this narrative he's writing about how he's renegotiating these little things and he's going to renegotiate the deals, right? That's not going to solve America's job problem. Then they go back and forth. Some days they're talking about some $1 trillion infrastructure project. The next day you hear from the Hill that that's not possible. That's actually something that could make a difference. Of course, these are the same Republicans who fought tooth and nail against a Democratic stimulus measure when the president came in and when we were in crisis.
Well, look, and the other policy is, tariffs and like starting trade wars, which is certainly not going to solve the issue because that's just going to raise prices on poor and working class people.
Right.
That's not an answer either. So his answers to the problem of manufacturing, which seems to be like threatening individual companies, promising an infrastructure bill that hasn't materialized yet and throwing up tariffs are not, policy-wise are not great solutions.
And just one more point too, that right now the economy is growing and adding jobs. That won't necessarily be true over the next 4 years. He is sort of riding a long trend of job growth, which he can say, oh, look, a new factory here, a new factory there. But at a certain point, it's live by the polls, die by the polls.
Taking credit for the stock market is a dangerous game, buddy.
Right.
It goes up and it goes down.
Why we didn't do it.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you guys about President Obama's relationship with President Trump. Do they talk? I mean, you guys probably know this. I can't imagine President Obama being like, yo, Donald, let's talk, given some of the stuff that Trump has been saying in recent days about, he inherited a real mess, blah, 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 right?
I think President Obama is better at brushing that stuff off than his hack aides who are on the phone right now are, and I think he can sort of see through that and try to have a constructive relationship because when they're alone in the Oval Office, like nobody's tweeting "Make America Great Again." It's a conversation about how hard the job is going to be. And I think he's tried to have a constructive conversation with him about the realities of how hard this is, the things he thinks he should protect and preserve, the political traps, the challenges of building a good team. So I think he's really tried to help him in a constructive way.
Clearly.
He hasn't really popped off in response to any of the provocations you mentioned.
Well, let me ask you, though, at some point, does he become a voice of those who are opposing Donald Trump? And is that how he becomes an effective former president?
I mean, I think on big issues he may. I think that it's his belief, and it's been his belief long before Trump, that the most important thing he can do is sort of inspire the next generation of voices to go out and lead, right? Because he knows that he's not going to run for office again. He's not going to be president again. But we do need leaders who aren't afraid to stand up and speak out and take up the fight.
Okay,
and
that's a perfect segue to my next question.
Sure.
This is going very seamlessly, isn't it, you guys? So
you're very good at this, that's why.
So who are the future stars of the Democratic Party, and really for maybe a more moderate Republican Party as well, if that exists?
So there's Tommy, there's John, I'm here. So we'll start there. I think that's an important group. But beyond that, I'm actually not sure. I don't really follow politics.
Kamala Harris out in California's got maybe the best bench for the party, period.
Garcetti,
Kamala Harris. Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
And then Jason Kander,
friend of the pod.
Jason Kander, is he the one that did the great ad where he put together the automatic weapon blindfolded?
Yes.
Yeah. And he lost, but he's still a very strong and much followed progressive voice, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And he did so much better in that race than he had any right to do.
He's a card-carrying badass. We also, obviously Elizabeth Warren is like an
I want to
emotional
be a
leader.
card-carrying badass.
I think you have been
I think
for
you
a while.
are. You just have to apply.
Okay.
Anybody can get one. It's like actually just like it's a scam, really.
All right. Who else? Who else do you see as and what about? Well, go ahead and tell me, and then I have a follow-up. Go ahead. Who else?
Who else do we say? I like Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, who's running
I
for
interviewed
DNC chair.
him. What about Michael Bennett?
Love Michael Bennett. I remember seeing him at a fundraiser once when I was traveling with Obama, and I wasn't paying attention because it was a long day, and I just heard this speech. I'm like, who's delivering that speech in there? And it was Michael Bennett.
The weird thing is, you think of these politicians as like people who are adults and you're senior, and then all of a sudden there's this generation of leaders like Jason Kander or like Seth Moulton, who's a member of Congress out of Massachusetts.
Seth Moulton's great.
Yeah, who are 35, the next generation of leaders that are really, really impressive.
What about Cory Booker and Andrew Cuomo? Do you see them running in 2020?
Booker, I could see.
Yeah.
I don't know if Cuomo. I feel like he's got a lot of baggage.
Who doesn't?
Katie, we don't like to criticize people until after they've been on the podcast. So you're kind of getting us in trouble.
I basically sounded like an uninformed voter there.
What about someone outside the political realm? We've seen with Donald Trump, a businessman can get elected. What about someone like Howard Schultz? And I know people sort of have jokingly suggested somebody like Tom Hanks. I mean, do you see this opening the door to a new breed of the non-politician running for president?
I would say that we should probably not try to learn too many lessons like that from Donald Trump, who is, I think, a unique figure. But I think the more the merrier. I mean, if there are people who are smart and charismatic and have good ideas and are expert. I mean, I don't know about famous actors.
What about Mark Cuban?
I thought you were going to say Zuckerberg.
Oh, well, what about either of them? Actually, let's discuss both of them. Let's start with Mark Cuban. He appeared at that All-Star Celebrity Game in New Orleans on Saturday in a jersey emblazoned with number 46. I think Donald Trump then tweeted that he wasn't smart enough, or has in recent days. Mark Cuban isn't smart enough to be president. I mean, honestly, you guys cannot make this shit up, can you?
It's ridiculous.
Am I allowed to say that on a podcast?
Oh, yeah, you can say whatever
we
you
have an
want.
explicit rating on our
we
podcast.
have that E.
Okay,
we have that E. But I mean, I like Cuban. Just clearly, Cuban gets under Trump's skin. So as long as Cuban's out there doing that, I think that's great.
And what about with Zuckerberg?
I mean, I just don't I think what we've all been hitting on in this conversation is that authenticity has become coin of the realm. And I don't know that Zuckerberg seems to be approaching this as cautiously as humanly possible.
It's like Mark Zuckerberg seems like he's spent 30 years in Washington when he speaks.
The way forward is not 6,000 word letters. It's, talking to people.
Do you think he's charismatic enough? I mean, do you think he's charismatic enough? Because I think the thing is with Trump, like him or not, for whatever reason, his bravado and his bluster and his kind of unconventional way of speaking.
Trump is charismatic and he is charming and he is funny, and we ignore that at our peril. I've always felt that he has a great sense of humor when he brings up if you watch his rallies, look, it's hard to put it aside because he's racist and despicable and he's lying all the time. But if that's not how you approach it, other than that, how is the play? But but if you could put that aside, or if you didn't approach it with that sense of who he is, he's great. He's an entertaining guy. That rally, he brings up a guy, everybody's laughing. He's like, we know our people. Everybody, he's an entertainer. He's a showman, and it works.
It seems like he's running the White House like an episode of The Apprentice too, right? I mean, kind of encouraging people to compete and to, I don't know. That's sort of what I've heard from people who are covering this White House. Didn't he say it was a well-oiled machine, or what did he say?
Fine-tuned machine. That's what it looks like.
And but it seems like, I mean, what do you guys hear about what's going on at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue?
Exactly that. I mean, I think that's his Achilles heel is that competence and the ability to run the biggest organization in the world is what the job is, and he has shown no capacity to do that. He's put in place a team that's over its head at best, if not constantly knifing each other. And I think that there will be repercussions. We haven't seen them yet because nothing really bad has happened. But it will, because
the world's a dangerous place. Things happen.
Yeah. I heard he doesn't really have a schedule. He sort of wanders around a lot.
Reporters tell us that, in years, many reporters who I've spoken to never ran into Barack Obama in the hallway, and they'll just see Trump wandering down to lower press, or they'll walk into the press secretary's office and he'll just be sitting there with the chief of staff watching cable TV. And it's not a good use of time.
Well, before we go, because I know you guys have given me more time than you schedule, which I really appreciate.
You've given us more time.
I know you all are busy, but let's talk about with Crooked Media. Are you trying to convert people to the cause, or are you just preaching to the choir?
We want to do a lot of converting here. We want to do a lot of brainwashing. No, we do. We think, like I said, I would love this company to expand its audience, right, and to reach more people who might, especially people who might not have been as engaged in politics as they want to be now, right? Because there's like you said, you can't escape Trump, right? We are at a moment in our history now where more people are paying attention to politics than they have been in quite some time. And for that new audience that's tuning in, that's who we want to reach. And I think mostly they're younger too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's arming people with information and resources, and I think that's hopefully a role we can play. I think that there's taking somebody from being less engaged to more engaged. And then I think there is also room for people who may not have heard a kind of, I don't know, I mean, look, it sounds like branding, but like kind of a no bullshit conversation that maybe has a liberal perspective, but might be accessible to somebody who isn't sure what their politics are, maybe thinks they're a Republican, or maybe has been conservative in the past. But
do you think this is going to translate to a higher voter turnout? Because I find that one of the most depressing aspects is the fact that so many people didn't vote, or voted for, threw their vote away by voting for Gary Johnson. Although I saw Bill Weld the other night, and he said 75% of their voters were actually Trump voters. I'm not sure if that's true.
Okay, Bill.
I know.
Sure.
So anyway, but do you think that more people will get out and vote? Because of all the people protesting, I'd like to walk around and ask all of them if they voted.
I think it's entirely incumbent upon the Democrats to put forward a candidate that inspires people and gets them out there. Because I think we did learn that demonizing someone, even when they deserve it, is not an incentive to get people out. And we need to inspire them and get them to the polls. And Barack Obama did that incredibly well. And we need to find that next leader that can help do that.
Yeah. And by the way, even before 2020, I think the single biggest challenge that Democrats have is taking this energy, this enthusiasm for protest, this fear and this anger and this anxiety, and translating it into votes in 2018 to win the House, so that we can begin the process of actually having a government that holds these people accountable.
Do you think there's any appetite for Hillary Clinton to run again? We've already started hearing rumblings about that she's positioning herself to go for it in 2020. Thoughts?
Literally none. I would be shocked if shocked. I would be more shocked than Trump
I don't
winning.
think she would want to do that.
I mean,
she would
She
do it
would
again.
punch the staffer in
yeah,
the face who recommended that she do that.
First of all, I can't believe that's real. I think that probably if this group of people were being honest, we'd say that we would be very much opposed to that because we need new people. We need a new voice, somebody that can challenge Trump from the outside.
So as fascinating as you three are, don't you want to ask me some questions about my podcast and why we're doing this and yada, yada, yada?
Katie, tell us about your podcast and why you're doing it.
Well, thanks for asking, John. You know, I thought it would be really interesting to have these kinds of conversations. First of all, I'm able to express myself during a podcast in a way that I can't in any other venue.
We love that.
I think people are hungering for deeper, more kind of meaningful and spontaneous conversations. And I think that is what a podcast affords. And people seem to respond to it. I was buying bananas at this little neighborhood market the other day, and this woman came up to me. She said, "I can't believe it." And she had her phone. She said, "Look what I'm listening to." I was like, "Do-do-do-do-do-do-do." That's really weird. So it's fun.
No, we enjoy the form of podcasting is it's a medium that lets you do a lot that others don't.
Yeah, and it's intimate, and I feel like I listen to podcasts, and it feels like you're kind of sitting at the table with the people that are talking, so it's kind of a different
definitely.
relationship.
I feel like we're having a slumber party.
That's right.
I am in sweatpants.
But that doesn't have to do with the party.
This was really, really fun. I love talking to you all, and I think, I don't know if you've found this to be so, but you can't really go anywhere where we're not talking about the state of the country and what's going on in Washington and President Trump. And I find it still endlessly fascinating. And why do you think that's the case? And I don't think it's just people who love politics either. Do you?
I think it's a mixture of fear and fascination.
Yeah, I mean, look, the fact that this happened this way, I think, is incredibly. I think everybody's surprised and everybody's still trying to figure it out. And I think certainly, I happen to think we're in the middle of a national crisis. And I think that crisis is, if there's one good thing coming out of it, is that people are talking to each other and trying to figure it out and thinking about politics in new ways. And it's kind of, you even see this with journalists. You see like people kind of getting back to first principles, like what do I do? Why do I care about it? What is important to me? I mean, that's part of the reason we did this company, because the election of Donald Trump, I think, forced us to confront what we cared about and if we cared about it enough.
Do you think there's a risk that Democrats are just repeating Hillary's mistakes by attacking Donald Trump and not coming up with a clear and cohesive message for their own sort of mission?
I think that could be a risk. I don't know if it's happening yet, but I think if we do not have a coherent vision to sell at voters in 2018 and 2020, then we very well could repeat those mistakes. So I think it's important that we do that. And
something we've talked about a lot here is that, I think that especially, and this is the point that you were making about kind of talking just to ourselves, it can't just be about how bad Trump is, and it can't just be about how he insults our values, our norms, the way we think politics should sound, vulgarity and all the rest. It has to be about how Trump's policies will hurt you. Right, how it will actually affect your day-to-day life. And we need to make sure we're constantly talking not just about how we have the right values, how we care about freedom of the press, how we care about these institutions and norms, but why they matter and why they'll make your life better if you follow the policies you care about. I alluded to this question earlier, and I don't think you all really answered it. How long will it be? I think we veered off into a whole conversation about manufacturing, but how long will it take before people who think that Donald Trump voted for him because they believed he would make their lives demonstratively better? How long will it take before they say, hey, you have to pay the piper, we voted for you and our lives aren't better? Or do you think that he'll take enough incremental steps and their lives will be sufficiently improved?
I think the odds are that he will hurt them because they will not necessarily realize that the Affordable Care Act was benefiting them, or that certain tax policies will be changed that will overly benefit the wealthy. So I can't put a ballpark time frame on this because some of it is going to have to do with the implementation of policy and the way people get their news about it. But I think that what he's going to do is going to cost him electorally. I genuinely do think I will say that elections help focus the mind. So I think when we get to 2018, if there has not been any policy that helps working people out of this White House, I think people will respond accordingly at the polls.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a being president isn't a campaign. You actually have to do things. You can't just complain. You can't just whine. You can't just pick a target. People will actually see what happens in their world.
And I know you aren't betting men, but do you think he's going to make it all 4 years? And maybe you are. I don't know. I don't know you guys well enough.
We are out of the prediction business. All right, because
We suck at it.
Because I still think Hillary's going to win.
Well, that's a nice way to end this conversation. It's really fun talking to you guys.
you
Can
too,
we do
Katie.
this?
Katie. Thank you so
Can we
much.
do this again in 6 months and
Yeah,
talk
we'll
about
check in.
sort of
We'll
what
check in, see if the
has
country's
happened
still
to
here.
journalism, what's happened to policy, and what's happened to the Democrats and the Republicans?
For sure. We'll call you from the gulag.
Yeah, right. If one of us can use our phone call of the day.
All right. This was really fun. Thanks so much, you guys.
Take
Thanks.
care, Katie. Bye-bye.
Brian, you were listening to our whole conversation, which went on a little longer, I think, than they anticipated. What did you think of some of the things they had to say?
Well, I thought one thing was very smart, which is that they're now out of the prediction business. I think journalists can fall into that trap at their peril. And I thought, Katie, you made a really interesting point about where the media should go from here in the face of this unrelenting assault from both the right in general and Donald Trump in particular, which is less focus on tweets and style and more on facts and substance. And I think that is how the media responds. I mean, I have always thought that Fox News gets it half right with their tagline, that the press should be fair but not balanced, that if one side is right on the facts and the other side is wrong, it is not biased for the media to take the side of the facts. And I think that's what the press should do now.
I think what might be an interesting idea, Brian, is that during a presidential press conference or even an interview with a surrogate for Donald Trump, to have someone in a control room where a fact checker can put on the screen immediately when a statement is made if in fact it is true or false. I don't think you do the true, but you would do the false. For example, when Donald Trump claimed during his press conference that he won more electoral votes than anyone since Ronald Reagan, Peter Alexander fact-checked that immediately. I'm sure he was looking on his phone and figuring out the numbers for all the presidents who had more electoral votes than Donald Trump. But if you had someone in a control room saying right away, this is incorrect, these are the facts, what do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I think live real-time fact-checking is challenging because sometimes it takes a little while to dig up the facts. But if you can do it on something quickly like that, it would be very powerful. Like when Donald Trump said over the weekend that there was a terrorist attack last night in Sweden, which was totally wrong. Somebody could have fact-checked that at the time. I mean, I remember watching that press conference when he said the thing you mentioned about the electoral margin and thinking, yeah, that's great. You know, he's gotten the biggest electoral margin of any president since Reagan, except for George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. So that would have been a good fact-check at the time.
Let's talk about what the Democrats are going to do moving forward. I think the hosts of Pod Save America and the people behind a new company called Crooked Media, as you said earlier, Brian, are trying to harness this sort of wave of activism that we're seeing almost on a daily basis out in the streets, on social media, wherever. Where do you think that's headed? And what do you think they can actually do to shape the narrative or how this activism is actually employed?
Well, it's interesting. If you look at history, often when one party moves to an ideological extreme, the other party follows suit. That is, they don't fill in the vacuum in the center and reach out to all those people who feel alienated by the ideological party in power. Instead, they're so angry and outraged, they move in the other direction and they rally their own base. And I think the Democrats are at risk of doing precisely that right now, ceding the center. And I think the major challenge for the Democrats moving forward is figuring out both how to rile up their base and how to reach people who abandoned them in the last election.
And what about the Republicans on Capitol Hill so far, other than John McCain and Lindsey Graham? They seem to be supporting Donald Trump. At some point, do you think they're going to get to a place where they say, you know, we're not so jiggy with that?
Yeah, I think that point would have to be when Trump's support drops below 85 or 90% among members of his own party, because you got to remember that most Congress people are more concerned about primaries these days than they are about general elections. And then I think the water would be a little warmer for more Republicans to wade in and join McCain and Graham in criticizing Trump. But Katie, I wanted to ask you about this manifesto that Mark Zuckerberg wrote that's gotten a lot of attention, saying that civil discourse depends on a strong press, that we should support the news industry. What was your reaction to that?
Obviously, I am very much in favor of a free press. And I think Thomas Jefferson said, if you gave me a choice between a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I'd choose the latter or something. I'm paraphrasing.
So we're not
founder of my university.
So we're not enemies, the American people, Katie?
No, I don't think we are. But, how do we convince the American people or a certain segment of the population that that's certainly not true? So it's a very challenging time for the media. And I think that it's smart for us to band together and try to figure this out for the good of the country.
I worry that we're headed toward the kind of bifurcated media future that you describe, in which...
I don't think we're headed. I think we're smack in the middle of it, Brian.
Yeah, people don't even agree on the facts anymore. I mean, people, have said we used to agree on the facts and disagree on our views and opinions. Now we disagree on the facts themselves, and that makes it very hard for us to kind of come together to solve any problem.
Well, here's the fact. We're out of time, Brian, but it's been fun doing a debriefing with you after chatting with the fellas from Pod Save America. We'll see you next time, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. Bye, Brian.
Bye, Katie.
Thanks to the lovely and talented Gianna Palmer for producing our show, to Jared O'Connell, who's also lovely and talented, for mixing and engineering. Now, damn it, I'm going to have to say everyone is lovely and talented. So are you, Ryan Connor, for your engineering assistance in Los Angeles. Also, thanks to our social media maven, Allison Bresnick, who helped spread the word in such a creative way about our podcast, and to Emily Bina for her part in producing the show.
Mark Phillips, thank you so much for our very catchy theme music. It's still in my head, as always. Katie Couric, Mitch Semmel, and I are the executive producers of this show.
And remember, you can always email us at comments@couricpodcast.com. You can find me on social media, too. I'm Katie Couric on Twitter and Instagram, katie.couric on Snapchat. Brian, you're on social media, too, right?
Just Twitter, @GoldsmithB. You can join my tens of followers, people.
Anyway, we're going to ask you a big favor. I know we're not just saying this as a final thought on our podcast, but we really would love you all to rate and review us on iTunes. Brian, tell everyone why that's so important.
Well, it really helps more people to become aware of the show. The algorithms on Apple take into account how many people rate and review each show, the activity around it, and that helps to drive awareness across the tubes on the internet. So we really do appreciate all of you, not just telling us how much you like the show, but telling your friends and your family, if you appreciate the show, spreading the word to them as well.
Brian, that was really moving and a little desperate, but thank you very much for making the case for rating and reviewing. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe as well. And thanks for listening, as always. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks.
Hey, you made the mistake of not turning off your podcast in time, so now you have to hear this cross-promotion for Hello from the Magic Tavern, a weekly podcast in the magical land of Foon, hosted by me, a human from Chicago.
And me, Usador, wizard of the 12th realm of Ephesius.
And me, Chunt. I'm a shapeshifter, but I'm mostly a badger. But I guess I've also been an alligator and a tiny horse with a top hat.
If you want a fully improvised comedy fantasy epic, this is the show for you. You can start at the beginning and binge your way all the way up to episode 100, or honestly, just jump in on a new episode. It's not The Wire. You'll get it.
Aye, join us, and we shall entertain thee hour after hour, o'er and o'er.
Also, speaking of The Wire, who's Stringer Bell again? Wait, which one whistles?
I don't want to talk about Earth stuff.
That's funny. Love it as our Stephen Miller.
I'm a California fascist. It's a new kind of thing.
That sounds like a Mamas and the Papas song. California fascist.
This has been an Earwolf production. Executive produced by Scott Aukerman, Chris Bannon, and Colin Anderson. For more information and content, visit earwolf.com.